Right, funnily so, you may or may not know I've been redecorating kind of stuff, right? I thought this was quite funny because I like uncovered loads of old stuff. And I thought this is quite appropriate. I found this guy. There you go. There's my degree in music, in case I needed to validate myself for teaching a chord theory lesson. This does not validate nothing, by the way, and this means nothing. I blagged this degree. You're supposed to know music stuff, but I pretty much did everything by ear. So that kind of sets up the tone for this streamy lesson type thing, right? Even though I'm a teachery guy, I don't know everything. I don't know all the theory I should know. I've got a kind of mixed balance of theory, ear, instincts and cluelessness. A good mix of that going on. That's how I do it. So I'm going to show you kind of the stuff that's been useful to me. For starters, I see a lot of guitar teachers sometimes online who teach the way that they got taught, right? I don't think that's always the best way to do it, right? It's good that it worked for you, but if you teach for a long time, you get to try different methods and approaches and you get to see what works for more people. So the way it worked for you might not be the best way. So for example, the way I'm going to show you some things is not the way I learned it, but I wish it was, kind of thing. Does that make sense? Right, so the plan is, what a lot of us as guitar players have is what I like to call fragmented learning, where you learn a little bit from this either video lesson or this pal 20 years ago or something you see on TV or a book or all these kind of little bits and bobs, right? And sometimes there's stuff missing that could be useful. So we're going to go back to the very, very super duper basics and we're going to hopefully do a glue lesson. That's what I like to call it, right? So hopefully there's some glue in here that can stick some pre-existing things that you know together and make some sense out of it. Maybe, and what we're aiming for, hopefully, is if we can get an aha moment or two for you, then that's a total success. Even if one person gets an aha, then that's great. In fact, do me a favour, if you get an aha, just write in the comments, take on me, right? Take on me. What makes the guitar hard is, right, you can get to a really proficient level on guitar without knowing a lot. And see this thing here, this fretboard, this is actually a nightmare layout for learning theory, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to mix and match between guitar and keyboard. Here's one I made earlier, and I even wrote the letters on for you just before we started the stream with some post-its that are not really sticking on properly, but there you go. Right, so we're going to use this layout and we're going to use this and hopefully we're going to make some sense out of it. Right, so tones and semitones, right? We probably already know this. So on your keyboard or whatever, generally the white notes generally are a tone apart, but there's a couple where that's not the case, right? The black notes are your sharps and flats. So basically the distance between one note to the next adjacent note, whether that's a white to black or a white to white, is what we call a semitone or a half step. But we're going to call it a semitone. And the distance between two is a tone, right? So look, for example, I'll show you here. Notice that there isn't a black key in between E and F. So there's no E sharp and there's no F flat. Sorry, I should probably first explain the black key in between C and D, right? So we can call that C sharp. I like to think it is C plus 1 or D minus 1, D flat. C sharp, D flat. So when it comes to the E and the F, there's no black key, so it's just E to F. There's no E sharp, there's no F flat. So let's go to the guitar. So the low E string, going up one semitone, right? One key, one fret. At one fret, that's a semitone. And then if I went up 2 frets, it went from F to G, that's a tone, right? So there you go, semitone, tones, 2 frets. 2 frets tone, 1 fret semitone. I bet you already knew that, but like I said, we're doing super duper basics here, day one stuff. Right, okay, so the next thing is really basically the musical alphabet ranges from A to G and then it repeats again back to A. It's a cycle. Speaking of cycle, this is the way we're going to try and think of the order of the notes in a circle, right? Rather than in a line, right? We're going to think about it like that. We're going to come to that in a minute. Right, the next thing we're going to look at is, I'm going to put something on screen here, hopefully, major scale. Yeah, that'll do it. So here's our major scale, let's just do that. Okay, now specifically what we're looking at in the major scale is not so much this guitar pattern here, we'll get to that in a minute, but we're looking at this here. This is the formula of the major scale and the distance between the notes. Right, so the distance between the first and the second notes is a tone, the distance between the second and the third note is a tone, the third and the fourth is a semitone, and then it's tone, 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 and then it's a semitone going back to the one again. In fact, all you really need to remember is that the distance between the third and the fourth note is a semitone. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone, tone. So the C major scale is the one that's kind of used most often because all the white notes are the scale, right? So going from C to D is a tone. See, we've skipped the semitone there. So we've got C to D is a tone, D to E is a tone. Notice how the third to the fourth notes is a semitone. That's the one you need to remember. And then we've got tone, tone, and then we've got a semitone going back from the seventh note to the octave, 8 octave, right? So far so good. You remember I was saying tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 right? So I'm going to do it from C. So I'm going to go up a tone, go up a tone, go up a semitone, up a tone, up a tone, up a tone, up a semitone. So that's tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, right? There's your major scale. Now, if I look at this diagram up here, there's how it's played on guitar. And in fact, I need to find C so I can do it in the same place. So, fret 8. If you look at this pattern here we've got there, we're going to play it like this. Right, so hopefully you can see it there. See where it says root note? That's what I'm starting with finger 2, and I'm going basically fingers 2 to 4 on frets 8 to 10, 2, 4, then the next string 1, 2, 4. I'm talking about fingers here, and then we've got 1, 3, 4. So that's 8, 10, 7, 8, 10, 7, 9, 10. And that's just one octave of the major scale. That's the major scale. Right, now, this is useful because we're going to use that to sort of recognise our intervals visually on the fretboard. We'll get to that later. What is a chord? Because this is chord theory. I'm showing you pianos, we're talking about scales, but this is chord theory, so let me get into some chord theory. So what a chord is, in its most basic form, is a group of 3 notes, right? 3 notes minimum. So what we've got is, in the case of C, we're going to use the first note from the scale, the third note from the scale, and the fifth note from the scale. So first, third, fifth. We'll also call this as the root note, the third, and the fifth. And this is what we call a triad. That's the most basic form, chord form, 3-note triad, right? So C, E, and G in this case, but we're actually not going to focus on the notes too much. We're just thinking about the intervals, which is the distance between the notes, right? So root, third, and fifth. C, E, G, right? There's your root, third, fifth. Now on guitar, if you play a C chord, I'm assuming you already know a C chord, looks like this, right? Now, the first note that you play is a C, second note is an E, third note is a G. That's actually all you need for a C chord, that's your triad. All you have after that is duplications of notes that we've already had. So here is another C, it's another root note, and then here is another E, it's another third. So the way I like to look at chords, and the way I would like us to look at chords when we do chord of the week in the future, is think like, don't worry, you don't need to know this now, but this is the way I want us to think in the future. Root, third, fifth, root, third. Intervals, right? That's the way I like to look at things. See, notice I'm not talking about the actual note names themselves. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Right, where's next? I'm going to show you how to make a minor chord really quickly, right? So what we do is we take the first note, the third note, and the fifth note, and to make a minor chord, all you do is you take the third note and you flatten it by a semitone, right? Which means instead of being C, E, G, in this case it's going to be C, E flat, G, right? Right? So major, root, third, fifth, minor, root, flat, third, fifth. Now this is kind of going to hopefully make some sense to you on guitar. I'm going to take a chord that we're already familiar with because this is where the problem starts on the guitar, right? Are you ready? Remember that major minor thing, right? You with me? Here's an E chord. Now in this particular chord shape, the intervals are not in order, right? And I'll tell you about that later on, don't worry about that just now. You may well know the difference between an E major chord and an E minor chord. you take that finger off, right? But what we're essentially doing here, this G sharp in the chord, that is the third, right? And what we're doing is when we take that finger off, we're flattening the third, making the chord minor. Alright? You with me? You with me? Now, have you ever wondered why when you play this shape here, right, you get an E chord, a major chord, but when you use the exact same shape up a string, right, and notice that I went that way and I said up because we're going up in pitch, it's getting higher. Anyway, right, you take the same chord shape up here, but now it's minor. What's going on there, right? Why isn't that major? It's major here, why isn't that major? Right, okay, I'm going to show you why. It's because of the annoying tuning of the guitar. Well, it is annoying and it's not, right? But this is why it's a notoriously difficult instrument to learn theory on, this fretboard, and because of the tuning. So the problem with the guitar is that it's almost tuned in fourths, intervals, right? Bear with me while I explain. So here we go. Here's my little circle of notes that I like to use. This isn't the cycle of fifths, this is just like notes written in a circle, right? And this is a really sort of quick way of, it's a cheat way, it's not perfect, but just so I can sort of show you what I'm talking about here. Now, hopefully we know the names of the open strings, E, A, D, G, B, E. If you don't have that memorised, get that memorised, right? You could say elephants and donkeys grow big ears, Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie, whatever you want, right? It's only 6 letters, just memorise them, right? E, A, D, G, B, E, right? Okay, so the guitar is almost tuned in fourths. So when we start on the E string, right, and we go to the A string, check this out. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, right? E to A, we're going to call that a fourth, right? And then when we go from the A string to the next string, the D string, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then D to the next string, which should be a G, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a fourth, right? And then the G to the next string, which is a B, 1, 2, what? 3. What's going on there? It should be a C. And then the next one, instead of being an E, should be a 1, 2, 3, 4, should be an F if it was all tuned in fourths universally up, but it's not. So it's a B. Now, hold on a second, I'm going to go back to the keyboard for a second. If we remember, the distance between B and C, look, there's no black note in the middle, so it's just a semitone, it's just a half step of a difference, right? So the B string, hold on, here, come up with semitone. So this is what that note should be tuned to, but it's tuned one back. It's flattened, right? So hopefully that might make sense why you play the E chord shape here and you get a major chord, this one being the third, and then when you move it up a string set, this one now sounds minor because this string, because of the tuning of the guitar, is pre-flattened for you. So the third is already flattened in this tuning. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully one person got a wee, hopefully, right? If not, sorry. This is why I don't teach on YouTube, right? So anyway, there you go. So that's why you've got major down here, minor up here, because of the tuning of the guitar, because a lot of people wonder that. Okay, talking about intervals, right, so the intervals is basically the distance in between notes, right? So I'm going to go back to a major scale again, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? So that's basically, if you could hear this, it would be do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I know, I'm a beautiful singer, I can't help it, right? But anyhow, so that's our major scale, right? Now, the distance from the first note to the second note, we'll basically call that a second, right? And then we'll call this a third. We'll call it a major third because it's from the major scale. We'll call this we're just going to dumb it down a bit, right? We're going to call this a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and an eighth, an octave, right? So it's the same note, an octave higher, like a whole sequence higher on the keyboard, right? So there we go, ba 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 ba. So that's our intervals there. Now, what you want to get used to is visualizing these intervals on the fretboard, right? And this is where your scale pattern comes in handy. Now, I've just said that the guitar is a notoriously difficult instrument for the layout of theory, the fretboard. but it does have some benefits. The guitar is just such a great instrument for pattern-based learning, right? Let me bring this back up. So this note I'm playing right here, this G, that's this one here, right? That the cursor's on, right? And then I'm going to go to A. Now, these are both on the same string, so you can't hear them, but I'm going to use the open A and the G at the same time. There you go. There's the sound of a second, right? And then we're going to have the major third. That's these two notes here. Ba, ba. Right, and then these two here are going to be the fourth. Right, and then these two here, the first, I'm always going from the first note to another one. So I went from the first note to the second, first to the third, that's a third, first to the fourth, that's a fourth. This one I'm about to do now is the first to the fifth. This is a power chord, G5 if you like, that's why it's called G5, because it's the root in the fifth. Right, and then we're going to have the sixth, and then we're going to have the seventh, and then the octave. So recognising these patterns is quite useful. Okay, so far so good, hopefully. Learn your major scale, it's important. You kind of assign each note in the scale a number. Here's the next thing. For people who don't know, right, I know that a lot of you will know stuff already, but for the people who don't know, another one of these mysteries is what the numbers mean in chords, right? I'm actually going to talk about two things at once here, right? I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Thinking about how guitar players learn chords, right? So when you first start learning the guitar, you learn C, or E, or A minor, G, all the kind of chords that you would normally learn, right? And the way we learn them is we put our fingers in a particular position, we find out what strings we're supposed to play, memorise it, and that's how you play that chord, that's it. We generally don't think too much about the actual notes that are in the chord, or the role, what they're doing, what their function is. Now if you think about, if you applied that way of learning to learn every chord, right? How many chords are there? Somebody Google it, I'm only joking, right? But anyway, right, I'm going to start from G, right? So here's just some examples in G, right? So the sort of different permutations of a G chord, right? So you've got G major, G minor, I'm not going to play them all because I probably don't even know them all, right? So G major, G minor, then we start adding some numbers. Let's go the lowest number I can think of, G sus2, G sus4, G6, G major 7, G minor 7, G dominant 7, and then we can go into nines, G major 9, minor 9, dominant 9, 11s, major 11, minor 11, dominant 11, 13s, major 13, minor 13, dominant 13. We've also got a whole different kettle of fish. We've got diminished and augmented, and then when we've got the dominant chords, that opens up a whole kettle of fish with altereds. So you could do like a G, 9, flat 5, sharp 13, if you want. You could do that. There's loads of chords, right? So if you imagine applying the same way that you learn your first dozen chords or bar chords or whatever to every chord in every key, you're not expected to memorise them all, right? It's not the ideal way to learn how chords work. It's better to have a system, right? And that's kind of like what we're doing here. We're talking about the intervals, right? And not specific notes. We're not talking about C, E flat, G as a C minor or whatever like that. We're talking about intervals, the distances between notes and where they are on the fretboard layout, being able to recognise them, all right? Another part of this we've not talked about is actually recognising them by sound, which is probably more important. Like I said, I'm mostly an ear player, so that's more important to me. But anywho, moving on. We're going to talk about the numbers then, because that does mystify some things for players. What do the numbers mean in chords? Right, if you remember at the start, back to our triad, right? In this case of C, our triad is C, E, G, right? That's the three notes to make the basic chord, and it's the first note, the third note, and the fifth note from the scale, right? So you can think about it like this. Anytime there's like a chord, you know, A, E, F, D, C, whatever, think of them as always being something that we don't say 1, 3, 5, right? So a C major chord is 1, 3, 5 of the C major scale. An F major chord is 1, 3, 5 of the F major scale. A D major chord is 1, 3, 5 of the D major scale. You get the idea, right? It's the same every time, right? And you could go a little bit further with that if you want, and you could say a D minor chord is the 1 flat 3 5 of what I forgot what example I just gave. I think it was D minor. A D minor chord is the 1 flat 3 5 of the D major scale, or an E minor chord is 1 flat 3 5 of the E major scale. Now you could say that it's 1 3 5 of the E minor scale. It's the same thing. We'll leave that for another day. But anyway, so far so good, hopefully. So check this out. Here's my C major chord, triad. C, E, G, right? Root, third, fifth. So given that a C chord is 1 3 5, what's the next inevitable number in this sequence? 1 3 5. No one's going to get this in the chat in time because there's a 10-second delay, but I'll do it for you. 7, right? So usually that's the next note that we get added in to form the sort of most commonly used extensions in chords, right? So what this is here, right, I'm adding in the 7th note from the scale. Look, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. This is the one I'm adding in, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got the 1 3 5 of the chord plus the 7, right? So this chord is a C major 1 3 5 7, C major 7. Does that make sense? Hopefully that might have been an aha moment. Let's look at this on guitar, right? So a C major 7, we're going to play a C major chord. Right, so what I've got here is, here's my C, here's my third. This is the kind of thing we should be recognising from that scale pattern up there. See that first to third note, the little staircase? These are major thirds, you can spot them everywhere. So there's my C major, right? Root, third, and then the G is the fifth. Now this C here that I'm about to play, that's a duplication of the bass note that I've already got. Now what note do I need for my 7th again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I need a B in there. Now it just so happens that where I'm playing that C, this could be a B by just using the open B note. Ooh, isn't that pretty? C major 7 chord. So you maybe already knew this chord, right, and how to play it, but hopefully now we'll understand a little bit how it works. So we're basically taking the numbers are their position in the scale. Notice how I keep using the keyboard. Do you think that the keyboard is an easier layout for your brain, even although you don't play the keyboard or the piano? I don't. These letters on here are to help me too. I was making mistakes today when I was trying to teach this on piano. I was like hitting the wrong keys and everything and embarrassing myself in front of people who also play the piano. Anyway, so yeah, how does the keyboard layout work for you for visualizing things? Does it make more sense than this? Because this is the biggest problem with guitar. It's a notoriously difficult layout to learn things on, right? See, if I play this E note here at that pitch on piano, this is the only E you can get of that pitch on the piano, right? You can have another sort of like 3 octaves this way and another 3 octaves that way. You can only get that E, that pitch, there, on that one key. On our guitar, right, we can get an E, open, we can get the exact same pitch E, fret 5 on the B, 9 on the G, 14 on the D, and if you've got 24 frets, you can even get a 6th one on your E string. All the same pitch, so it's an annoying instrument, but it does have benefits. So, listen, what I was saying, the whole point in this is that I'm going to do chord of the week every week in the live streams, which is only going to take like 5 minutes. And I'll get a chord, and it'll be something like, I don't know, I'm going to do this. There you go, this is a G minor 7, right? But rather than saying, here's a G minor 7, this is what I hate doing and I don't want to do. I don't want to say, here's G minor 7. It's finger 1, fret 3 on the E string, finger 3, fret 5 on the A string, and then you bar these 3 there, G minor 7, ta-da! Right, that is useless information to everybody. This is why I wanted to do a theory lesson primer, so we could talk about intervals. And I know we didn't get like as deep as we should have done for it, but I want to be able to show you next week. Here's a G minor 7. I want to say, look, here's the root note, G. We're putting the 5th in next, which isn't the right order for intervals, but that's what we're doing. There's the octave there, but we're not using the octave, we're going to use this flat 7 here, which makes it a minor 7. I know we don't understand this yet if we've based on what we've spoke of so far. But if we do a little bit more, we'll start to get this. So we've got root, fifth, flat 7. There's my flat third, which makes it a minor chord, right? And then I've got another fifth, then I've got another root. G minor 7. This is the way, I think this is the most benefiting way to understand chords. And like I said, learning and memorising every single chord in the world ever isn't a good way of doing it. But if you understand all the ingredient component parts within the chord, then you can manipulate it to your liking. So if that's a G minor 7, what if I wanted to add in a 9? I'll add in a minor 9. So I'm just going to take, well, a 9's actually there. That's too far. I'm going to add this one in here. There's a minor 9. I like my 13s, but anyway. Right, so yeah, you can manipulate the chords based on the sort of notes in their scale position and a bit of a framework. It's still useful to memorise chord shapes and that for quickness, but you always want to be able to stop yourself and say, right, wait a minute now, what's going on here? What if I did this and that? And then thinking analytically is the way forward. Right, I think that is the end of the theory primer. Is there any questions? If there's any questions, chuck them in the chat. If you've been on the live stream before, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this channel that's here, and you'll know that the kind of stuff I do, I try and have a bit of banter, a bit of fun, daft guitar reviews, having a laugh with guitar. That's my whole thing, is I want to have a laugh and all that kind of stuff. I teach, it's my day job. The YouTube is my respite from doing the teaching stuff. But it's 2025, try out some different things, see what it's all about. But what I don't like about teaching is I get a wee bit too serious about it sometimes. And I want to have a laugh. Right.